Please welcome Reverend William Barber.
Hello, my friends. How are you? Did y'all use that word solidarity up here? Let's use it a couple of times. Solidarity. Solidarity. Forever. Forever. Solidarity. Solidarity. Now. Now. Solidarity. Solidarity. Forever. Forever. One day longer. One day longer. One day stronger. One day stronger. Give yourselves a great, great, great big hand. If I was in church, I'd say protocol has already been established. But we certainly thank God for, first of all, the presence of the Spirit in our midst, in the spirit of struggles for justice. I believe you want to find where the Spirit of God is, find where there's a struggle for justice and righteousness. And to all of the organizers, workers, all labor, as Dr. said, has dignity. And we celebrate you on tonight. Bob, thank you. Billy, your attorney, Tony. And one Tony said, you say Tony, you're going to have 2 or 3 people saying Tony Spinia. Bertha grabbed me when I came in. My New York congressperson, Sister Clark, good to see you. Brother Perry, Brad, the councilman here. Everything that I say tonight, especially if it's bad, blame it on Chris Kennedy. C-H-R-K-E-N-N-E-D-Y. He made me spell it. To 1109 in Brooklyn. Your local leader here. Thank God for him, and I understand there's some easy pass workers, am I right? Here. And also in the back. Tonight, in this celebration, you know, you all keep talking about 3, and that's kind of dangerous to talk about 3 during Easter week for a preacher. You know, preachers say, went down 3 days, but early Sunday morning. But I was talking to Chris on the way over, and he said, what are you going to preach on Sunday? And I told him that I was going to be preaching on resurrection faith in a Good Friday world. Resurrection faith. And I thought about one of Dr. King's favorite scriptures, Hebrews chapter 10, verse 39. Actually, he quoted this scripture to the night that Edie Nixon's house had been set afire, blown up. And Edie Nixon, this was in Montgomery, the first bus boycott. And Edie Nixon wasn't all that nonviolent. He was a World War II veteran. And he looked at Dr. King and said, what do you have to say now? They're blowing up our houses. We're losing. And Dr. King turned to him and said, I will say to you what was said in the book of Hebrews. We are not of those who shrink back unto destruction, but we are those who always persevere unto the salvation of the soul. Because faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. I thought about this week, March the 30th, Monday, was the 145th anniversary of the signing and the ratification of the 15th Amendment that guaranteed the right to vote, or that states could not deny or abridge that right to people of color. Now, women would come later, but the framework for people of color, after a bloody civil war, after the death of a president, after what looked like a Good Friday loss, 145 years ago, we saw the ratification. And I thought about how this Saturday, actually, tomorrow, April the 3rd, is the anniversary of the last speech of Dr. King. Saturday will be the anniversary of his murder 47 years ago. But tomorrow is the anniversary of that last speech. It looked like the sanitation workers were losing. In fact, tomorrow, 47 years ago in Memphis, a thunderstorm and a tornado came up in Memphis, and Dr. King was depressed on top of it, and he chose not to go to the speech that night. Because he said, nobody's going to show up, and I really don't feel like going. He was struggling with a lot of stuff. It looked like he was losing. In fact, a group of ministers were preparing or putting out an article in the New York Times against him. And he knew that was supposed to be coming out on April the 5th. Well, somebody came back and told him 2,500 people showed up. Workers. Sanitation workers. Despite all the threats, he got up, he put his clothes on. Now, most of us, because of the way the media plays his speeches, we remember the part where he said, I've been to the mountaintop, I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I might not get there with you. But before he said that in the speech, he said this to those workers. Nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back now. 47 years after that, those words were said, I want to say that to you. Those of you that have fought to win this initial contract for Cablevision, nothing would be more tragic than for you to turn back now. Now, being a preacher and a historian and a trained pastoral counselor, I like to help people understand their movement in a bigger context, because in order to keep your energy up, you must understand what you're doing is something bigger, something that means something to the whole world. I think only you were saying that this is not just, it's about your raising about, but it's something else going on. And so let me read some words from history, and I'm going to borrow again from Dr. King, and then I want to remix it and make it work in the now. 1961, Dr. King said to the Union movement and to the Civil Rights movement that the two most dynamic movements that reshaped the nation have been the labor and the civil rights movement. He said in 61, our power and potential is enormous, but we've not yet used but a fraction of it. But if we connect our power, he said this in 61, 30 years from now, people will look back on this day and honor those who had sense enough to come together. Right? Then on October the 7th, 1967, I believe it was, 63, given at a speech given to the Illinois AFL-CIO, Dr. King said to the Union movement and the Civil Rights movement, together, say together, we must exert massive pressure on the government and others to get jobs for all. Together, we must form a grand alliance. And then, in a speech when he dealt with the meaning of hope, and then he later on titled his speech, The Other America. Dr. King said in 1968, before he was killed, he says, there are two Americas. One America is beautiful for situation, and in a sense, this America is overflowing with milk, the milk of prosperity and the honey of opportunity. This America is the habitat of millions of people who have food, material necessities for their bodies, living wages, culture, education for their mind, and dignity for their spirits. But tragically, and unfortunately, there's another America. Now this other America has a daily ugliness about it that constantly transforms the buoyancy of hope into the fatigue of despair. In this America, millions of work-starved men, work-starved people, walk the streets daily in search for jobs, and those that have jobs need living wages. This is 40 years ago. He says, in America, millions of people find themselves living in rat-infested, vermin-filled slums. In this America, people are poor by the millions, and they find themselves perishing on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. He then went on to say, in the midst of this America, this other America, it affects Mexicans, it affects Puerto Ricans, it affects the Indians, it affects whites in the mountains. He says, but the largest group it affects is the American Negro. Because the American Negro finds himself living in a triple ghetto. A ghetto of race, a ghetto of poverty, and a ghetto of human misery. And the only way we can address this is we must seek in the civil rights movement to bring the movement for workers' rights and civil rights together. And then 18 days before Dr. King died, 18 days on March, 16 days, March the 18th, 1968, Ashley, one of our young, invited him to Memphis. He spoke to 17,000 people. And you probably never heard this speech, because they won't print this. They won't print this. This is the radical king. He says, you know, Jesus, and you know they went in the season of Lent. He said, you know, Jesus reminded us in a magnificent parable that one day that a man went to hell because he didn't see the poor. He didn't see the poor. His name was Dives, and there was a man named Lazarus who came daily to his gate in the need of the basic necessities of life. Now, Dives, I get mixed up sometimes. Dives didn't do anything about it, so he ended up going to hell. And this is King talking. He says, but there's nothing in the parable that says that Dives went to hell because he was rich. Right. He said, Dives did not go to hell, and Jesus never pronounced immorality just on the basis of riches. Dives went to hell because he passed by Lazarus every day and acted as though he did not care or did not see him. Dives went to hell because he allowed Lazarus to become invisible. He allowed workers struggling to become invisible. Dives went to hell because he allowed the means by which he lived to outdistance the ends for which he lived. Dives went to hell because he wanted to be a conscientious objector in the war against poverty. And then Dr. King said, and I come by here to say that America too is going to hell. If she doesn't use her wealth and her vast resources to end poverty and to make it possible for all of God's children to have the basic necessities of life, she will go to hell if she does not answer this question. When I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was naked, did you clothe me? Now, what that says to me, could it be that your movement is a part of keeping New York from going to hell? Oh. That's something loud to hear. Could it be that your adversary does not even recognize that you are his salvation? That's right. Now, he may not listen to you, but at least you have put in front, somebody said, of his faith, that nothing would be worse than for you to have billions, and the people that work for you can hardly make it. That's right. Mm-hmm. In a real sense, I don't know how you all use this word up here in the north, but down south, we call mistreating folk sin. That's right. That's right. Then Dr. King said, this is why, this is 47 years ago, but it has meaning for you. He said, this is why we have got to give ourselves to the struggle until the end. Until the end. And we must be concerned about our brother and sister. And he said even to non-people that weren't fighting for the Union, you may not be on strike, but we need to fight together for the soul of our nation. Now that's 47 years ago, Chris. That's 47 years ago. But did you know that today, 47 years later, we are the richest nation on earth. $17 trillion in gross domestic product. And yet we have more poor people than any other moment in our country's history. Think about that contradiction. Our poverty numbers, especially child poverty numbers, are far higher than any other advanced Western democracy. And we have the greatest gap between rich and poor since we started collecting the data 5 decades ago. And our income equality is documented to be the highest in the advanced world. In other words, what workers make and what CEOs make is higher in this country than any other so-called advanced culture in the world. That's where we are today. Even today. The poorest counties are in so-called red states led by Republicans or blue states led by Democrats that have learned the way not to care. That's right. Otto Schwammer, who's an MIT professor, says, and this is MIT talking about consciousness. Now, when MIT starts saying we got a conscious problem, I mean, MIT is not a school of theology. You know. But at MIT, Otto Schwammer says that we are committing attention violence against the poor and the working poor. We don't even want to say the word poor. Our politics, even many of our good-meaning people don't want to say the word poor. He says we have a blind spot in our economic theory, and it's called consciousness. Coretta Scott King, before she died, she said, when they asked her one day, she said, how do you feel about violence, Miss Coretta? Your husband was shot through the throat, and the bullet destroyed his whole vertebrae and killed him almost instantly. She says, well, that's a form of violence, Coretta said, but that's not the only form of violence. She said, violence is starving a child. She said, violence is suppressing a culture. She said, violence is neglecting school children. She said, violence is discrimination against working people and not letting them have labor rights. She said, that's violence. She said, ghetto housing is violence. Ignoring people's medical needs and their need for health insurance is violence. And then she said, let me tell you, even the lack of will to stand up and developing an apathetic mindset that will not fight for something better is also a sinister form of violence. Amen. Aren't you glad that you all have not been violent? Because you have stood up. Because if you had sat down, you would have been contributing to the violent culture in our world. David Newmark, the director of the Center for Economics and Public Policy at UC Irvine, said that people at the top have had phenomenal wage growth. The problem in America is not that there has not been wage growth. The problem is it's been at the top. The problem is that it's about 10% or less of America that controls 89 to 90% of the wealth. And people at the lower end of the spectrum, instead of seeing your wages increase, people at the lower end, since the 1970s, have seen your buying power decrease. In fact, a recent study at Harvard, they went out among people in the street, and they said to them, they said, tell us, what do you think the average CEO's income is beyond and above the average worker? And the average person they met on the street said, oh, 30 times higher. And they said, after they did that study, they said, no, the average CEO makes 350 times more than the average worker. And I heard what y'all said. Now, I'm a preacher, so I heard you say shit, but it's dumb. D-U-N-G, that's the prophetic word. It's dumb. It's a lot of preachers here. But it'll make you cuss, won't it? And how can you sit down when you know this? You see why this is big? It's about Brooklyn. But just like Selma transformed America, you don't know Brooklyn might be the next transformative. What you have done here. In fact, the last time that CEOs made 30 times more than the average worker was in 1960. 300. Wages for those. Y'all mind if I teach a little while? Because see, if you're going to organize, you got to have some teaching. You got to know not just your immediate circumstance, but you got to understand where your movement fits in the world. Wages for those who work on jobs at the bottom half have been stuck since 1973. How about that now? The wages have been stuck since 73. But the wages on the top, there has been extraordinary growth. And minorities are disproportionately poor. 27% of the poor people are African American. Latino and African American Indians are poor at a high rate. And when you disaggregate that by minority children, it gets even worse. And so to be concerned about racial equality, you must be concerned about income inequality. Y'all hear what I'm saying? So that's why if we are in the 21st century, we must fight to secure pro-labor, anti-poverty policies that ensure economic sustainability by fighting for full employment and living wages for everybody in this country. And if you understand what I just laid out, the context that you're in, and the fact that we could take Dr. King's speech in 68 and speak it today, and it would still be true, then you ought to understand, yes, your fight was hard. Because you really weren't just fighting against, what's his name? No. You were fighting against a whole mindset and a history and this current attempt to engage in attention violence and not address the other America. Because contrary to public opinion, this country and its business section don't like to repent. They don't want to say anything is wrong. That's why everything is made so cute. That's why even if Sister Clark invited the president, we have a great president, but if you invited the president here, I guarantee you they would not route his motorcade through the ghetto. It's almost decided that you don't go places so you don't see it. You are fighting to open up the eyes of the city, of the state, of the nation. And opening up people's eyes when they've chosen to close them is hard. But you got to understand that every victory is a victory for justice. Lord, you won, but you didn't just win for you. That's right. Just like Rosa Parks didn't just win for herself. And by the way, I don't know if you know, but after the Montgomery boycott movement, Rosa Parks had to leave Montgomery. She lost her job. She got fired. But what she did began a ripple effect that began to transform the nation. And somebody has to always be willing to be first. If Easter, I don't know how many of you claim to be Christian or know a little bit about Christian faith, but if Easter teaches you anything, somebody has to sacrifice. In order for things to open up. And you may not get all of the benefit. There may come along somebody 15 years from now that gets a better contract than you, but you will always be known as those who opened it up and made it possible. You ought to tell it to your grandchildren. You ought to tell it to your children. You ought to shout it from the top of the mountain. I was there when we opened up Cablevision and began a new union movement in New York in America. See, you flip the script. Cablevision. You turn your vision into a cable and pull each other up. Y'all better watch it. Y'all better watch it. Don't let this country boy slip here now. And so, you know, what day is today? Oh, that's on Thursday. Okay. I just want to make sure, because I do have one day I use one word. I mean, people say, your battle was hard. What the hell do you expect? When somebody has received their money from not paying workers, they're not just going to give that up easily. I mean, you would hope that they had a conscience, but come on. And when you're fighting this history and this oligarchy that exists and these struggles, you relied on exactly that's what was supposed to happen. My grandma said, well, you ain't better than Jesus. They fired you? Yep, that sounds about right. There was corruption? Yep. Somebody got paid off? Judas? Yep. Sounds about right. Sounds like you're in the right movement. Because there ain't but one place you could be. Either you could be the ones getting paid off, or on the other side of history, being the ones trying to make sure that everybody gets paid. So at some point, you got to get happy about unearned suffering and understand it's redemptive. And you got threatened? Yep, sounds about right. Intimidated? Phony meetings? Yeah, sounds about right. The National Labor Board came down and told you there was corruption? Sure. If those things weren't going to happen, there would have been no need for you to organize. You're fighting to change the trajectory. And it's been a fight in America since its founding, because the first Constitution of this state, this country, even though it said the purpose of the government was to establish justice, said that only white men that own land could participate in the formation of the democracy. So there is an element. It's a danger. It's an element that's within the DNA of this democracy that has always promoted social Darwinism, survival of the fittest. But there's also an element in this democracy that has always stood up and said, wait a minute, we're going to fight to make sure you do what you said on paper. And you get to choose. Thank God you get to choose. So if I had to choose between being lied on or being a liar, I choose being lied on. If I had to choose between being threatened for justice as opposed to threatening people because they're fighting for justice, I choose to be on the right side. If I got to choose between, being a political prostitute, selling my soul, my mind, and my body just to keep my mouth closed, or being free, I choose to be free, because I don't make no good prostitute. I mean, I'm handsome and all that, but I don't make no good prostitute. You know what I'm saying? Now, let me give you one more context. 2 more, and I know they're looking at me. But I want y'all to leave here understanding the bigness. It's bigger than just this initial contract. So you're writing a new contract with the consciousness of America. Now, how many years did y'all say y'all fought? 3. Now, don't y'all get mad at me. Don't you get mad. But I want to tell you, you know, I'm from the South. I wish we could have a 3-year fight. Good Lord. And I'm not belittling what you went through now. Don't say the man talk. But I'm trying to tell you, Alma Adams, who's in the Congress, Alma Adams. First of all, do y'all know where I come from? We didn't even have our first black congressperson in the 20th century until 1990. They threw the last black congressperson in the South was put out in 1901. And it took us till 1990. We're just having our second woman. The second woman. And Alma Adams, before she went to Congress, you know how many years she had to fight in North Carolina to get the state to raise the minimum wage to just over $7? 10 years. I said 10. No, 10 years. Yeah. And she was almost going to quit in the 9th year, and you can tell her, I said, talk to her, and I went to her and I said, now, I had just got the president of the NAACP. I said, wait, do it one more time, and we're going to put a movement behind you. We're going to form this moral movement. And when we did that in 2007, the moral money didn't start a few years ago, it was going, and we did, and then she won. And she was fighting Democrats. This wasn't when the Republicans were in trouble. The Democrats blocked a black Democrat for 10 years just to get the minimum wage to $7.25. We decided to you know, in North Carolina, it's a so-called right to work, which is an oxymoron, because it doesn't mean right to work, it means right not to work, really, with labor rights. Now, we started trying to organize, in North Carolina, it's illegal for municipal workers to unionize. And it's, yeah, and you know how long it's been illegal? Since 1959. And you know why? Because after Rosa Parks won, and Aunt King and those won the Montgomery struggle in 1958, all of the Southern legislators, especially North Carolina, said, wait a minute, if the black people get together with the bus drivers and all, and form, they're going to not only get union rights and labor, they're going to change this country. So they voted and passed a statute in North Carolina that makes it illegal for firemen, policemen, teachers, anybody that works for state or municipal government to unionize. It's illegal. I didn't say that. It's illegal. And we're still fighting. We've been in an 8-year fight to get that Jim Crow law taken off the books, and we've only been fighting against Republicans for 3 years. You don't hear what I just said? I said we've been in an 8-year fight. And then a few years ago, we had this crazy notion about unionizing the Smithfield Hall processing plant. Way down in Tar Heel, North Carolina. Not one stoplight. There's 2 deers that stand out there and they say, turn this way. No, I'm serious. And the CEO stood up in a shareholders meeting and said, if you hurt one of my hogs, I'll fire you and prosecute you. But if you fire a worker for not doing their job, I'll celebrate you and give you a raise. And we started 20. We got it in 2008, but it started 20 years early. They had their own jail. Now I heard some of y'all say you got arrested. This company in the South had its own jail inside the plant. If they arrested you on that site, you went to jail inside the plant. Now hear what I'm saying. And they turned the Latinos against the whites and the whites against the blacks. And it was a 20-year struggle. Well, I can't even say everything on camera that they did. But it was just, I mean, you know, and the night before we won, they were threatening to charge me, Nelson Johnson, and another minister under the RICO law. That was the threat they brought against us. Yeah, that's gangster stuff. They were going to charge them that over some Don Baker. You know, whole process. And we had to make a decision, because that was going to make us back up. And we had to say, well, you got to do what you do, because we knew we were right. We knew our lawyers were right. But they wanted us to back up. But after 20 years, now the first few years, the union movement kind of worked by itself. But when we brought union and civil rights and faith together, we took 5 years. But it was 20 years. 20 years. In fact, we got an angel from New York. I'll tell you this quick story and I'll move on. One day we were out in front of the plant organizing, and they were mad. And they brought these guys out 6'5", 6'6", with 9 millimeters, you know, the crew cuts. And they, if you don't get off this property, get away from here. We were standing actually on the side of the road. We're going to arrest you. Now understand, in Tar Heel, there's no media. There's no media like y'all have up here. There's no media. And no stoplight. There's a lot of trees though, with some limbs to hang. Y'all know that strange. A lot of that. And so we were there and we got on our knees and we were praying, getting ready to go to jail. And I remember John Mendez, you know John Mendez, I think from down in North Carolina. Yeah. And John is part after Apache and black. He said, we just going to jail. I said, man, good gracious. Inside the plant where they got the hogs. And at that time I was 160 pounds heavier. And I didn't necessarily want to go in no plant with no big hogs, you know. And so a state patrolman pulled up. And he said, come in. Come in. And I got off my knees. He said, what are you doing out here? I said, we're protesting, but we want these folks to have union. Now watch this. He said, I don't like them either. I'm from New York. He did. He said, look, I'm from New York. I don't know what in the world. I came down here. This is crazy. He said, I tell you what, he said, I'm gonna help you out. He said, go there and tell all the guys to get up and back up 15 feet. You'll be on state property. And I said, so I went back and I told him, and the guy said, no, Robert, no, it's a trick. I said, no, the Lord told me. Because I ain't want to go in that plan. I mean, I had been arrested, but I didn't want nobody mistaking me for nothing. You know, and I said, the Lord told me. So they said, okay, but if it's wrong, it's on you. So we backed up 15, and he jumped out of the car. I said, what's going on? What's going on here? What's going on here? Of course, I can't use the dialect, you know, the north, how y'all talk in New York. You know. And so the guy said, well, they're on our property. He said, no, they're not. He said, they're on state property. It's my property. I'm the state patrol here. And they can do everything they want to do, and I'm going to stay right here and protect them. And he did. He did. He did. And then all the workers saw that they weren't bothering us, and they all came out. And that was a turning point. And then finally somebody called the press, and the AP showed up. And then we got 500 stories in papers all across the world. And then the tide began to change. You never know. But my point is, I know it was tough for 3 years. But put that in context. And thank God for this. You're still here. Sometimes that's your shout. Sometimes that's your prayer. It might have been 3 years. It might have been 4, 5, 20, 25. But I'm still here, clothed in right mind, and we are winning. And I want to close here by saying, connect this struggle. Don't just stop with about wages. This struggle's got to be connected to the fight for voting rights.
That's right.
And right now we're in a terrible fight. You know the Supreme Court gutted Section 5.4 of the Voting Rights Act. And you got to understand, that may not impact, New York, but it impacts the South. And if it impacts part of you, part of New York is covered, right?
That's right.
That part of New York is
My
covered.
district is covered.
Okay, well watch this. You need to hear what now. Is she a friend? Is she a friend? I want to teach y'all something. Is she a friend?
Yes.
Okay, watch this now. Watch this. So they gut Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act, which is the formula that determines how states get covered. All right? Which means Section 5, which is pre-clearance covered, is no longer in effect. Now, why are they doing that? Because the extremists, Tea Party folk, can't win if everybody votes. The other way is they know that the demographics are changing, so what they're trying to do now is create all of these bad districts so that they can control who gets elected by stacking and packing and bleaching the black and the brown and the progressive white vote. That's what's going on. So now it's in the Congress, all right? So the Congress, Sensenbrenner, has come up with a suggestion. And the suggestion is he wants to pass, he says we got a bill to restore Section 4. But you know what, Congressman Clark? I read the bill. And some of us have read the bill. Now watch this, Chris. This is why the union movement got to be involved in this. If the Sensenbrenner bill was to pass today, as it is currently written, and it's got some of us signed off on it. I'm just a truthful person. The reality is, Selma, Alabama wouldn't be covered.
That's right. That's right.
North Carolina wouldn't be covered. South Carolina wouldn't be covered. All the states that were covered 40 years ago wouldn't be covered. Tennessee wouldn't be covered. Virginia wouldn't be covered. Mississippi for only 1 year. Georgia for maybe 1 year. Texas for maybe 1 year. And New York would be covered. Y'all didn't hear that? Right now, if the Sensenbrenner bill passed, Sister Clark's district would not be covered, which means it would no longer be a pre-clear district. That's why the union movement has to get involved in this fight for Voting Rights Act, and we have to stand together to push that Sensenbrenner bill somewhere, way away, nowhere, and come up with a real Voting Rights Act fix that guarantees coverage. And the Black Caucus and Progressive Caucuses need the pressure of the civil rights community and the union movement together in order to get that done. And if you didn't know, that's the reason the 2 senators from North Carolina are blocking Loretta Lynch.
That's right.
It ain't because she's black. She could be Loretta Lynn. They wouldn't vote for her. If she was Clarence Thomas, they would. The reason they don't want to vote for Loretta Lynn is not because she's a black woman. It's because of her character, her commitment to uphold the Constitution that was shaped in the crucible of the consciousness of the civil rights movement. They know that if you don't have a strong Voting Rights Act, stay with me on this, the only safeguard you have is the Attorney General's office. And if the Attorney General's office is weak and destabilized, then you cannot protect against all these attacks on voting. If you cannot protect the attacks on voting, you cannot elect Congress people that are pro-labor. That's what's going on. And pro-civil rights. And so we must understand not only this battle in the context of history, but this battle in the context of voting rights, and your new labor fight must also include the fight for voting rights. And then lastly, you must understand this movement that you're in as a moral movement. It ain't just about some money. It's about the soul of this country. It's about our deepest religious values, like the one in Isaiah. I don't know if you've ever read it, Isaiah 10, that says, woe unto those who legislate evil and rob the poor of their rights. Or the one in Ezekiel 22 where it says, your leaders are treating the people like rabies-infested wolves who are eating up the flesh of them and using them to make profits. Those are not my words. Those are the words of Scripture. And so we are in a time right now where people are starting to wake up and realize it costs too much. It damages the soul of this country when we don't provide workers right, when we don't pay people what they deserve, when we take away people's voting rights. And they're beginning, I believe they're beginning to understand what this Tea Party Koch brother philosophy is all about. You know, if you break it down on the street level, don't try to be so deep about it. This is what they're selling to America. They're saying, look, America, if you want a great America, here's how you get a great America. Deny public education, deny health care, deny earned income tax credit, deny unemployment, deny labor rights, deny LGBT rights, deny women's rights, deny immigrants' rights, deny that there's any problem with the criminal justice system, cut taxes for the wealthy, put more taxes on the working and the poor, engage in every form of voter suppression. When the president even does something good for the nation, undermine him, talk about him, move against him, stand against him, talk about his wife, talk about his children, and then after you've created all this dissension, then turn religions against each other and try to say the same thing about Muslims that they used to say about black men, and some still do, that they're just brutes. You know, that's what the guy said about Mike Brown. He was a demon. That's that language that was said about black men, particularly in the 1800s, early 1900s. Well, use that same language about Muslims, and then, if you want to really have a great America, make sure everybody can get a gun easier than they can vote. That's the agenda they're selling. And the question is, will we let them get away with it? Or will we come together? Union and civil rights coming together, understanding that the deepest part of our soul, our deepest moral values demand that we come together. And that's why your movement is so important, because it inspires people one more time to believe that we can come together beyond race, beyond class, beyond color. We can come, or with all of those things, we can come together and we can win. And that's what America needs to understand. And we can win because it's right. Not just because it's going to give me a higher rate, but it's something right. There's something really right about justice. And we must begin to fight these fights from a moral perspective. And every time we're in a fight, we must say things to ourselves. Turn to your neighbor and say, you got to talk to yourself. No, say, really, you got to talk to yourself. I didn't say answer yourself, but you got to talk to yourself if you're in a moment. And you got to say, self, no matter what I'm going through, it ain't worse than slavery. And they beat that. It's not worse than when women didn't have the right to vote and they made it through that. It's not worse than when Franklin Delano Roosevelt raised the minimum wage in spite of the fact that he had polio and could not hardly stand. It's not worse than Jim Crow and we beat that. It's not worse than apartheid, but Nelson Mandela and the people of South Africa, when they came together, they beat that. It's not worse than what young people faced 50 years ago in Freedom Summer, and they beat that. Talk to yourself and say it's not worse than that. And then you got to find you a story that enables you to move. For me, my story, whenever I'm in a union fight or education fight, it gets hard. I remember, if I might be a preacher for a minute, what the Lord has done for me. And I remember how when things came together in my life. You know, you didn't know me then, 1993. Suddenly one Friday morning, I was no longer able to walk. You see me coming with the cane, but you don't know the whole story. I got up, I tried to get up, couldn't walk. They took me to the emergency hospital. I remained in the hospital 3 months. I went into depression. I never thought my legs would leave me. I was a football player. I used to leg press 500-600 pounds. I never thought my legs would leave me. But suddenly, from a disease I didn't know was lurking around in my body, my legs went. And I didn't know. They told me at 30 it was over. They told me I'd probably be in a nursing home. Yeah, went into depression. Had some strange visitations. I can't tell you all about it. But all I know is when we came together, when my doctors came together with my therapists, and my therapist got together with the pharmacist, and then my doctor, my therapist, and my pharmacist got together, and then the prayer warriors got together, and then the people in the faith got together, and And then my family decided that it was going to be a family fight, not just an individual fight. And then I got my singing together and my praying together and my swimming together. And when all those things came together, here I can walk now. I can move around. I can be up here in New York now. I can get on the front line now. When all those things came together, and I'm simply here to tell you, don't you let anybody tell you what you cannot do when you come together. Because when you come together with the right movement and the right faith, all things are possible when you join together. Don't you ever forget what the scripture said. We are not of those who shrink back unto destruction, but we are those who persevere unto the salvation of the soul. For faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. Turn to your neighbor and say, neighbor, we is the most important word in the justice vocabulary. The question is not what we can't do and what we cannot accomplish, but what we can do when we fight together and pray together and stand together and move together and organize together and believe together. Say, neighbor, if the mean folk are cynical enough to come together, we ought to be smart enough to stay together. Tell your neighbor, say, walk together. Walk together. Walk together. And don't you get weary. Because what a day. Say, what a day. What a day. What a day of rejoicing and of contracts and of victory when we all get together. God bless you, my friend.